Hello and welcome. My name is Aaron and this is the Thrive Alive podcast, where I'm going to be sitting down and chatting with some pretty special people that have inspired me along my health journey. I hope these discussions can inform and inspire you along your journey, so please listen with an open heart and an open mind and enjoy the show. Thanks for tuning in. Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive Alive podcast. I've got an interesting guest this morning. I've been taking medicinal mushrooms for well over, 5 years, ever since I heard the Paul Stamets podcast on the JRE back in 2017. Just really sparked my interest in foraging and growing and using mushrooms as a supplement and dietary. And when I started taking the Stamets 7, I've really noticed a difference in my cognitive function, my energy levels, and since then there's been a growing market in Australia for medicinal mushrooms, and I started buying them and I noticed that they weren't quite the same as the quality that I was getting from the Stamets 7. And I was recently at the Newcastle farmers markets, and what struck my interest was I saw this big lion's mane mushroom being sold from one of the stalls, which there's a couple of other mushroom growers there, but no one's doing the lion's mane, and I thought I'd give this one a try, and I was really impressed about the quality in comparison that I got from the Stamets 7. I was getting similar cognitive benefits, and I was only taking the one mushroom, not the Paul Stamets 7 blend. So I was super impressed by that. So I thought I'd get Ben from Hunter Gourmet Mushrooms on the podcast today. And Ben, how you going this morning?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm firing off your mushrooms this morning as well, by the way. I had 2 grams before we started. I know it says the dosage is like 2 capsules, which is 1 gram, is it?
Yep.
But I like to have the 2 grams a day. Really gets me firing.
Absolutely. Well, look, the dosage is always a minimum recommended dose.
Yeah.
A lot of the studies have shown up to 6 grams a day.
Yeah. Okay.
So, personally, I took 4 grams this morning.
Yep. Nice. And you do that every day, or do you have days off?
No, I take it consistently every day. Normally, what I've been doing recently is I'll take 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 2 before bed.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's been having some pretty interesting results.
Yeah, nice. Well, I like to kick the podcast off with this invitation, and that question is, what's keeping you thriving, and what is thriving in your life today?
Yeah, so I guess what's keeping me thriving at the moment is just learning and finding out new information, especially around the medicinal mushroom field. So when we started, it was definitely gourmet mushrooms was something that we're looking at a lot, and we found really medicinal mushrooms have been a huge focus. It wasn't something we expected to happen. It's starting to overtake our gourmet side of things, and it's something that I really get joy out of learning about and finding all this new information and new research that's coming out.
Has your mindset changed heaps as you've gone on the mushroom journey? It's like you're growing with them as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very different. I'm a pretty skeptical person to start off with, so my initial thoughts were very skeptical, but especially with lion's mane, what I've experienced personally and the research that's been coming out, it's definitely changed my mindset.
Yeah.
And given me a different way to look at things.
Yeah, for sure. How long have you been growing them for, or had an interest in them for?
So it's been about 2 years now that so 2 years probably since we started the journey, and probably about 18 months that we've been actively growing different mushrooms.
Yeah, nice. And the business, have you got much of a response? Is it online or just more so the farmers markets?
So we're getting a really good response from the farmers markets. Online, it's a very noisy market.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different companies doing all sorts of different things, and even me personally, when I did market research, it was so difficult to try and figure out what everybody was actually doing. Yeah. You had to dig through websites to figure out what they were actually selling and finding the small print here or there or not at all.
Yeah.
And I ended up just doing market research for our lion's mane capsules, having to make a spreadsheet of 7 different websites to try and figure out what they were actually doing
Yeah, okay.
and keep track of it because it was all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's why I said I could really tell the quality difference in the stuff that was out there in Australia, in even some of the health food stores or the organic places. Is it might be labelled certified organic, but you can definitely tell the quality.
Well, yeah, certified organic really only just says how they grow it. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily say what the end product is, and
Yeah.
that's where there's so much potential misdirection, misinformation with a lot of it
Yeah,
that a lot of the time you just don't know.
yeah, and it's becoming like a marketing scheme, just that term as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, marketing is seems to be in a lot of places 90% of the business.
yeah, yeah. So what were you doing before the mushrooms? Yeah, what was
so
that life like?
I had a pretty eclectic career. I was sort of always in sales to some degree. I spent a lot of years in retail sales and in new home housing sales and the construction industry. But as I guess going alongside of that, I'd started a medical science degree out of school, which I didn't finish. And over the last 5 years, I went back to uni and studied that part-time and finished that whilst I was working. And so it was about the same time that I decided I wanted to finish that degree and that my job was sucking the soul out of me. So I decided, well, I'd finish up, I'd quit my job, and I'd focus spending 12 months finishing the degree. And it was about that time I was trying to find something to do that I could do that would work in and be flexible around studying full-time. And it was just, I guess, a random Netflix sojourn that I found fantastic fungi. And as I guess my background's in human biology pretty much exclusively, mycology was something I'd really not had much information with or experience with at all. And that was something that really piqued my interest. And I looked into it for a bit and went, well, this could be something that I can do. It seems interesting. It's going to be flexible around the study, and it's, I can see that it's something that I think looks really cool. So
Yeah, well, this whole theme for this podcast is generally based around the hero's journey, and what that is like, are you familiar with the hero's journey?
to a degree, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I was actually watching Lion King a couple of days ago, and that's a perfect hero's journey. Simba is living in the Pride Rock paradise,
Yep.
and loses Mufasa, goes through an ordeal, has to go out on his own adventure, and then he eventually comes back home with knowledge, and he brings heaven back home again, which
Yep.
is really in his heart. So that's like hero's journey, and it's what it is, an archetypal story, so you can relate your life, even though you may have experienced something completely different to someone else, you can still relate to it because the archetype of the story is still there. So you were unhappy in your job and not knowing what to do, but you stayed with your path of university and finished the degree and got the skills, got the knowledge, and then now you can take that on, branch it off, and make something of your own out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly what you've done. It's like that was your underground mycelial period, and then Hunter Gourmet Mushrooms is like the fruiting body of what you've created.
It's a really good analogy.
Yeah. So so did you take it personally, like the growing stage and the cultivation? Was that personally for yourself? Was it always going to be a business, or did you just want to do it for yourself?
No. So interestingly, mushrooms was not something that culinarily I was really interested in. I think the first time I'd ever tried an oyster mushroom was one I'd grown myself, and I had to work myself up to put it in my mouth because I looked at it and I went, oh, I'm not sure about this. And so especially the world of gourmet mushrooms was completely new to me. It was just something I thought, well, look, there seems to be a market here. This seems really interesting. And I think for me, more the growing side of mushrooms is really quite sciencey, I like to say. And so that piqued my interest a lot. The end product was something that I guess was a side effect of what I found really interesting from the growing side. So to start off with, it was definitely an idea of, okay, well, can I do this? And to start off with, I was growing large amounts of mushrooms whilst I was testing my processes that were immediately going to the compost because there was no way I could get through them. I didn't know anybody that ate would eat 20 or 30 kilos worth of oyster mushrooms,
Yeah.
and I had no benefit to store them. So it was producing, going, yep, that works, and then essentially composting hundreds
Wow.
of dollars worth of mushrooms to test, because there was no way I could eat through them.
Yeah.
And to start off with, I didn't know what to do with them, or even to an extent. So that was something that I had to learn as well, which was how to cook with mushrooms. What are the things you can do? Everybody, tends to think that, oh well, mushrooms, you saute them with garlic and rosemary and put them next to your breakfast or next to a steak, and that's what mushrooms do.
Yeah. It gets a bit boring doing that after a while.
Oh, well, and with your gourmet mushrooms, you may as well, get a Rolls Royce and drive it to the shops once a week. It's such a waste. They've got so many more versatile uses. Your normal button mushrooms, your agaricus, they're absolutely perfect for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you get into the gourmets, they've got so much more versatility. It's such a waste to just do that with them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, initially to start off with, I think it was really a curiosity project of whether or not I could do it, and then I thought it was really cool. And then from there, sort of came more of my interest in having mushrooms as a part of my diet and having it there.
Yeah. So you started off with the oysters and then the lion's mane, or did you start them both?
So I started off with oyster mushrooms.
Yeah.
When you're starting off with zero knowledge, there's a lot there, and oyster mushrooms, there's so many different varieties as well.
Yeah.
So oysters was where I started, and they're a pretty straightforward mushroom to grow. And I grew a few different varieties of those and had some reasonable success. But it was at that point that I started to get more, I guess, research into the different mushrooms, and what kept coming up was lion's mane. And lion's mane for me was really interesting because as somebody with a medical science background, there was all this information saying that it worked on the brain and increased the cognition. It could be helped to reverse Alzheimer's disease, and they're kind of things that would sort of fit directly into my day-to-day life as a medical science student. That kind of stuff. It's like, wow, this is from a mushroom, and this is something I can grow. Okay, this is amazing. We don't have pharmaceuticals that do these things. The information that's coming out says this is really, it works. There's scientific journals and evidence-based research saying, this actually works. It's not just a suggestion that it might work. We've got people trying it in the lab, and the answers are what they think is going to happen happens.
Yeah.
This is incredible, and I can just grow it. Absolutely. And so that's what, all of a sudden, it was like, wow, okay, well, here's a mushroom that really ticks my box as I guess, a scientist from a certain degree, and fits in with what I'm trying to do as a business. And it sort of became my passion project. It was like, okay, well, this really, to start off with, oyster mushrooms are great, they're tasty, they're really versatile, but I'm not a chef. It didn't really make my heart happy. But once I found lion's mane, I was like, okay, this is really ticking boxes. And then on top of that, it's also a choice edible mushroom. It's got a heap of benefits as a replacement meat for people that want to have a less, more plant-based diet.
Yeah, I've heard it tastes a bit like lobster.
So if you have it on its own, lobster, but really it's quite inoffensive in its taste. It's very mild. So its superpower is that it is mild, but it's got the same texture as meat. So you can use it to replace protein in almost any dish, and it'll sort of just blend in with the flavours of the dish, but it will have the texture that you're missing from the meat missing out there.
Yeah.
So, when you put chicken in a curry, it tastes like curry more than it tastes like chicken.
Yeah.
And it's more the texture that you're biting into a chunk of chicken, that you've got protein there. And with the lion's mane, it'll take on that same flavour of the curry. It'll still give you the same meaty texture, but you're all entirely, I won't say plant-based because mushrooms are plants or animals, but you're staying away from animal protein. So it can be really helpful if you want to have a diet that doesn't have animal protein in there.
Yeah.
You're able to have this delicious, nutritious replacement that you're not missing out on anything because you don't even notice that it's not the real thing.
Yeah. So did you start cooking with the oysters first and then start moving into the supplements? Walk us through that little journey of,
Yeah, so
because you would have had to try things out for yourself before you decided, okay, I'm going to start recommending or giving this out to someone else, right?
absolutely. So the oyster mushrooms, essentially during that, I guess, R&D time when we were trying to get our processes working, and during that time, we grew a lot of bags of green mold. It's certainly something that if I would read something and I would say, oh, surely you don't need to do that. So I'd do it my way and I'd grow nothing but green mold. So there's lots of trial and error there where you don't have your process completely dialed in. But during that stage one, we got to successfully growing mushrooms, it was like, all right, well, we need to be the experts on what you can do with this, because I know if I'm trying to give it to my friends or family, they don't know what to do with it either. So I went on a journey where I would just do whatever I could with it. I'd try and find recipes and just try different things that I was almost certain I wasn't going to like, but that was the idea, to see how it went and, you know, find what works and what doesn't and what's tasty and what's not, from somebody that wasn't particularly mad on mushrooms from a flavour point of view.
Yeah.
And I guess from that point of view, I was able to go through and try all this different stuff and then recommend to people I know, oh, look, try it like this.
Yeah.
So pink oyster mushrooms are a really interesting mushroom. They're big and they've got quite a strong, pronounced flavour. But if you batter them in southern fried chicken batter and deep fry them,
Ooh.
they taste something like deep fried chicken bacon. Because when they're deep fried, they've got this really strong smoked meat flavour.
Yeah.
And then with the chicken batter over the top, it's like KFC bacon from a mushroom.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't like mushrooms, that's fine, but everybody loves KFC bacon.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people that don't like mushrooms are going to like KFC bacon.
Yeah.
And that was something that I found, it's like, oh my God, this is delicious.
Yeah.
And so being able to have things like that to recommend to people was really helpful when they may not be the traditional vegetarian or vegan who just wants to eat mushrooms all day because they taste like mushrooms. They want to try something that's different, but it's got flavours that they might be familiar with.
Yeah. I've always loved putting the oysters in like a chicken, like brothy soup, like in a sort of Asian style.
Yep.
With like enoki and maitake. Yeah. Oh, and definitely shiitake. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what did you notice when you started supplementing with the lion's mane? Like, were you getting the effects? And say if, for the people out there that don't want to put it in their diet, but they were looking to supplement, why would you start supplementing?
So this supplementing with lion's mane, it's pretty incredible. So the first thing I noticed when I started taking it was I'm somebody that doesn't normally dream. So when I go to sleep, I close my eyes and then I wake up in the morning. Or well, previously I'd close my eyes, I'd wake up at 4 a.m. for somewhere between 2 minutes and 2 hours, and then I'd go back to sleep and wake up in the morning. I wouldn't dream. I'd normally wake up in the middle of the night, and that was sort of my normal sleep cycle. Once I started taking the lion's mane supplements, I found immediately, all of a sudden I started dreaming. This would be for the first time in 20 years. And for somebody that's not dreamt for 20 years, to dream is really novel and really interesting and really cool. It's like, going to the movies for the first time ever. It's like, wow, that was really interesting. That doesn't normally happen. And I thought, well, shit, this is weird. They're obviously doing something, and this is a lot more than I was expecting, because the information I've read, it's going to help with memory and cognition and all the stuff that isn't necessarily immediately noticeable. And the second thing I noticed was I stopped waking up in the middle of the night, and I just started sleeping through. And so now all of a sudden I'm dreaming, and I'm not waking up in the middle of the night, which was painful. I thought, wow, okay, this is really incredible. And at that point I realised I was taking them too late in the day, and it seemed to be getting my brain firing at the wrong time. But there was also this benefit that I was sleeping through. So I started then trying different times of taking it and seeing what the effect was. And I found taking it first thing in the morning before I'd go to the gym, I just had a lot more focus and concentration during my session. And then by the time I came home, and I was able to sort of be more calm and relaxed during the day. And I thought, okay, wow, all right, this is interesting. Uh, and then as the weeks went on, I started. I've always had issues with remembering people's names, and I'd say to people, I'd meet them, they'd tell me their name, I'd tell them mine, I'd tell them I'm going to forget this in 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask you again in 30 minutes, so that way it's no longer embarrassing. And all of a sudden, I could remember names weeks later, and at that point, I thought, all right, well, we're on to something. This is obviously doing something.
Yeah.
And I'd read more and more research papers, and more research papers have been coming out, especially in the last 2 years. They've been coming out rapid fire, and they're really shining light onto what's actually happening in the brain, which is really incredible stuff.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well in the gym. Like, if I have it pretty close to just before I go to the gym, then I'm not trying to rush through my exercises. I'm
Yep.
spending a little time. I'm actually putting my attention on the muscle I'm working rather than just thinking of the next thing. Oh, I got this left to do, and then I'm jumping in the sauna. It's like, no, I'm really present in each individual workout.
A lot more intentional.
Yeah. And how did you find after having a full night's sleep and dreaming? How were you waking up then in the morning? Like,
So there was a bit of I guess, adjustment to the dosage if you're going to have it late. But I was feeling, provided I hadn't had a particularly high dose, and I'd still had a moderate amount of deep sleep as well, I was starting to feel really refreshed in the morning. I dreamt, I felt good, I felt refreshed, I was ready to get up in the morning, I wasn't groggy, and not waking up in the middle of the night meant that I was having uninterrupted sleep, which was going to be really beneficial. I was starting to wake up and be able to get out of bed instead of waking up and then you spend the next hour dreading getting out of bed.
yeah. Then go to coffee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then going to coffee, then maybe an hour later starting to become a human.
Yeah. So what did you... So I mentioned it earlier, and so did you, about seeing mislabeling in the online and like the mushroom market in Australia. Like,
Yeah.
What have you found?
So I guess there's a few parts to it. As I said, lion's mane is something that has a lot of validated research saying that it works. There's a lot of other medicinal mushrooms that, for one reason or another, don't necessarily have that information behind them, but that doesn't stop a lot of people selling them, claiming that they'll do everything and anything. Now, there's two ways you could look at it. It's either those people are misinformed and are saying these things accidentally, or that they're willfully ignoring facts that maybe it doesn't do this and claiming it does, whatever, whenever, like the old snake oil salesman from the olden days. So one of them's an innocent mistake and the other one's willful bullshit to sell more product. The question about which one it is, who knows? The other side to that, though, is that obviously there's a lot of medicinal mushrooms that the research just hasn't been done with, and a lot of that comes from the fact that in order to get funding to do research, generally it's either got to come from the government or it's got to come from a pharmaceutical company who's going to make money out of it. Now, the government funding is very limited in how much there is, and there's only so many things that the research can be done with, and pharmaceutical company money isn't going to pay for something that you can't patent. And being a product of nature, any of the stuff out of mushrooms, you can't patent. They might be able to purify it and sell it, but so can every other pharmaceutical company out there. So nobody's going to pay for the research that everybody else is going to be able to take advantage of. So there's a lot of mushrooms there that the research just hasn't been done, which doesn't mean that they don't work. It just means that nobody's paid to verify that they do work in a scientific way.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not a black and white area, and you see that with lion's mane to start off with. The initial research was really only coming out of China and Japan, where it's been used as a traditional medicine, which was enough that the government would pay for the research almost as a way of national pride, saying our traditional medicine works,
Yeah.
we're going to fund the research to show you. They had no benefit apart from pride, but that was enough to start that initial knowledge base that then meant that other labs would pick it up because it was, okay, well, this is neuroscience related, and this might help with Alzheimer's that we're working on, or this might help with depression that we're working on. So now it's a treatment that we can work on that's not necessarily, are we going to make millions of dollars off selling it, but is this going to work to help humans in general?
Yeah.
And so you see this very slow trickle of little research projects coming out here and there from China and Japan, and then starting to be picked up by Europe and the Western world. And once that's sort of shown this base that, yes, it does work, I think I try and keep up with the papers as they come out. And there would be 30 or 40 papers published last year.
Yeah, wow.
As opposed to maybe between 2000 and 2015, there might have been 10.
Yeah.
So it's similar to a lot of other natural products as they start to get base information. It goes to that psilocybin's been one of those things that there was very little research. I think the current renaissance with psilocybin, the research didn't start until around early 2000, and now I think in the last 6 months there'd be 30 or 40 at least papers that have come out on that, which is something that was unheard of before 2000.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's so cool how fast and rapidly it's all changing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on mushrooms in general being grown from China and then being sold over here?
So look, it's a tricky one. In theory, it should be fine if you take out human greed. So you would assume that growing a mushroom in China, if it was done in the right areas, in the right situation, with controls in place to make sure that it's not in heavily polluted areas, the mushroom should be fine. That's a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
So mushrooms generally will take on a lot of the pollutants and heavy metals that are in the local area. So if you're growing them on wood that's filled with heavy metal contaminants or pollutants, things like that, you can end up with a mushroom that contains those. And even just different environmental exposures to mushrooms will change their nutritional composition at the end. For example, if you grow oyster mushrooms without light, their vitamin D content will be almost nothing. But if you have UV exposure during their growth, their vitamin D levels go through the roof. So you need to make sure that your mushrooms are getting UV, so they get their vitamin D just like us.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for stuff coming out of China. You don't know exactly what it is, and if you were, we add in a couple of layers that, well, somebody's buying it from China, but then they're reselling it. And so are we getting the full information that they got from China, or are they adding their own spin on it to come through?
Yeah.
And that's something I saw with a lot of the products in the market when I was doing my initial research. You would see these products that, it claimed it did this, this, and this. And there's a particular claim called, I think it's Tao Dien, or Tao Dao, which means it comes from its ancestral place. And it was a really great way to say these mushrooms are made in China, but without saying these mushrooms are made in China, because these mushrooms were from their ancestral place, which was more likely to be China than anything.
Yeah. It's kind of like a sexy way of saying it.
It was a very sexy way of saying made in China. And they had this cool little logo that was very sort of zen. And you're like, oh wow. And then you look, it's just we've imported these from China en masse in powdered form.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the other part. When you're buying something in from another country, it's coming in powdered, they're claiming it's one thing. It turns up, is it that? Is it not? Does it have fillers? Does it not?
Yeah.
Very difficult to know. And unless you're the person that's doing that quality assurance, it's just so hard to know that the thing that you're buying in bulk, that's serving 100,000 customers a year, well, is it exactly what I want? Has it been shown love, care and attention, or is this just grown in the most polluted areas? And you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you don't know. I think it's good to really listen to your body. If you are someone that's taken these supplements and you're not sure where they come from, or if you are aware that they come from China, then tune into your body. Are you just putting these into your body and not feeling anything and just doing it because it's a popular thing?
Absolutely.
Or tune into your body and test it out for yourself, meditate on it and see if it's working for you. Because if it's not, then I can guarantee it's probably not the highest quality, or someone's cheaping out and you're being fooled. So
that's right. Absolutely. And so with the stuff for, and our capsules are a 100% lion's mane. It's fresh. It's not been left to go old and oxidize. When we dry it, it looks perfect. It's the same quality that we would sell in the markets.
Yeah.
And then that goes straight into our capsules. There's no change. There's no fillers. There's no nothing like that. And so we're putting in completely unoxidized, beautiful fresh mushrooms, and it seems to, you can definitely notice.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of things that you just don't know.
And plus, they're grown in Australia, so you're not contributing to the freight from something so small all the way from China.
Absolutely.
It's grown right here in Australia.
That's it. So essentially, it comes straight from our little farm.
Yeah.
And there's not really any of the additional, carbon costs of moving this stuff across the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely good to be supporting. Well, you touched just before on the studies on psilocybin. Like, I'm aware that they contribute to neurogenesis, and that's pretty much as far as I know, like, from studies. Are you able to share any more on that? Or
Yeah, so look, both lion's mane and psilocybin do very similar things when it comes to, neurogenesis and helping the brain stay healthy. They both act in a very different way, but the end result with both of them is they seem to, one of them really beneficial things for cognition and neurogenesis is a thing called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so what that does is it keeps neurons alive, so it helps stop them from damaging and dying, and then it also encourages them to make new connections. So when we've got increased levels of BDNF in the brain, and neurons are more likely to make new connections, which is what happens when we're learning and creating memories. We're having new synapses created where new neurons are connecting to each other, and that's creating these beneficial paths. So lion's mane definitely works to increase BDNF in the brain, and that helps with cognition, it helps with memory, and it's helping with brain health overall. Psilocybin seems to have a long-term effect of also increasing these nerve growth factors, so BDNF, and there's another one which is just called nerve growth factor, and that helps with the, neurogenesis side of things, brain health, helping the brain create new connections. But what also happens in psilocybin when people are taking it, especially on a high dose, is that the research seems to show that it disables a thing called the default mode network in the brain. And that seems to be like a steering wheel lock that stops any major changes to neuronal pathways. So when people are taking high dose psilocybin, what seems to happen is that not only is there an increase in nerve growth factors that encourage the brain to create new connections, but the steering wheel lock's taken off the brain, which allows it to go in directions that it wouldn't normally go. And so it seems to be that there's two things happening. One, that the brain's allowed to go in whatever direction it wants, and it can rewrite pathways that used to be locked. And B, it's being encouraged to create those new connections with another, these nerve growth factors, which are encouraging it happening. So you end up with people being able to, especially in the ideas of depression, anxiety, being able to rewrite, hardwired neuronal pathways for maladaptive behaviors, because we've taken the steering wheel lock off and thrown in a heap of nerve growth factors that are encouraging it to make new connections. And that's where people generally report that they've come back from these experiences, and something that may have been a long-term issue or a maladaptive behavior that they've just always had. When somebody's anxious about something, they know they shouldn't be, but that doesn't change the fact that they are. So it seems to allow that particular hard-wired neuronal pathway or story to rewrite into a healthier way. And then once the short-term effects of psilocybin wear off, that steering wheel lock gets put back on, the pathways have been rewritten. And so now you've got a system that's a lot healthier. And so that seems to be where a lot of the current benefits are coming from. And obviously Australia's just rescheduled psilocybin treatment, I think it was the 1st of July,
Yeah.
where it's obviously something that, even our own Australian government has conceded that it's pretty good for people in certain situations.
Yeah, especially for veterans struggling for PTSD. Um, yeah, it was kind of interesting what you're saying there. It's like your old story starts to meet your new story.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's kind of like what Paul Stamets was saying on Fantastic Fungi when he was climbing up that tree. He was able to stop stuttering, which was a behavioural pattern.
Absolutely.
So he one session it took, and he could have been going therapy for the rest of his life for that. And it's really cool and really interesting that because breath work, which is what I do, can also take you into these states of consciousness, and you seeing these little communities pop up. I just did a podcast with Ben Borg from Sacred Breath of Life, where he's introducing stacking the lion's mane, the psilocybin, and breath work all together. So it's like just blowing the lid off, taking people on these journeys, rewiring the network, and then they come back in a safe place and are able to look at these situations. Like you said, it could have been a trauma from years ago, and it's almost like they've got a new perspective and a new energy around it where they can integrate that into their life and sort of, like you said, rewire or rewrite that old story into a new story.
Absolutely. My hypothesis on that is that most of these sort of built-in traumas, I guess, that you could call them, that a lot of people have, like Paul Stamets' stuttering, or other things that you're talking about, generally come from experiences that we've had in childhood or adolescence where we don't have the full ability to fully understand what's happening in the context that an adult would. And so all of a sudden, with a child's context, these things become hardwired information that, this might mean that, or 2 + 2 = 7. When if looked at with an adult's perspective, 2 + 2 obviously equals 4, but it's too late. The story has been written and it's been hardwired. And it's my hypothesis is that when people are undergoing psilocybin therapy, that it allows them to re-examine the initial false assumption, but with an adult perspective, and go, well, actually, no. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 7. 2 + 2 = 4. But with the steering wheel lock off, it allows them to actually update that information now with adult perspective, but without entering into a state where that default mode network is disabled to allow that kind of thing to happen. It's almost impossible to update that information.
It's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a big journey just for me, like back in 2017 having my first mushroom experience, and then getting into, I've got all these stack of books here of foraging for mushrooms. Have you ever been foraging in the forest for like any of the gourmet mushrooms, like in the pine forest in autumn?
Yeah, so look, I when I get the time, I love to go out, I guess, foraging for different mushrooms. If I'm going on a bushwalk, I tend not to pick them so much as play a game of real life Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
Where
it's cool just to photograph them sometimes too. Hey, you can get some nice ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just, for me, a lot of the time it's just collecting and then testing my knowledge of, okay, can I identify that? I think that's Cordyceps militaris. And then I'll take a picture, I'll check where it's at, I'll come home, I'll confirm, yeah, it was. Hey, cool. Yeah, was that chicken of the woods? Absolutely. I think this was turkey tail, and look at this beautiful assortment of it.
Yeah. So you found chicken of the woods before, have you?
Yeah.
Cool.
So, interestingly, when I very, very initially started my, I guess, mushroom journey, I went on one of my first bushwalks trying to find different mushrooms, just as an interesting thing. I thought, oh, wow, mushrooms are cool. I'm going to go and see if I can actually notice them, because it's something that when I'd gone bushwalks before, I'd never noticed them. And so this time I went intentionally just looking for mushrooms. I was like, that's the whole point of this walk. And I ended up photographing a heap of mushrooms that I had no idea what they were, because I was just starting out. And in one walk, looking back at the photos, I was able to see, okay, I found chicken of the woods, I found turkey tail, I found Cordyceps militaris, I found, I think, Psilocybe subgregaris, subgrosa.
Subaerigosa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think oyster mushroom, as well as turkey tail, and what I can only assume would have been a Hericium coloroidus, which is Australian lion's mane,
Yeah.
because we shouldn't have any Hericium erinaceus in the wild. And that was just on like a 2-hour walk.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back at the photos, 12 months later, I was like, oh, there's that. And I was able to identify all these different mushrooms that I was just taking pictures because I was like, okay, wow, there are a lot. This is cool.
So is the Australian lion's mane like medicinal?
So the Australian lion's mane doesn't have a lot of research. So there's some research that they've started to look into, but essentially the main compounds in lion's mane, Hericium erinaceus, are things called hericinones and erinacines. And Australian lion's mane doesn't contain any of those. It contains its own similar molecules called coloroicins, but what they do and what kind of outcome they've got hasn't really been widely researched because it's sort of an Australian native.
Yeah.
Different species, same family, has these compounds in there, and they seem that they might have similar effects, but completely different molecules to what's in your traditional lion's mane.
Yeah. Yeah, I love foraging. Like once autumn comes and the earth starts to take that big breath back in, it's like my favorite time of year to get out and start foraging in the bush. Like I love getting the saffron milk cups from underneath the pine trees, but then pine trees are dynamite. Like you can get the saffron milk caps, the slippery jacks. I don't know the botanical names, by the way. I just know the common name.
Okay.
And you can also find the psilocybe subaerigosa under pines as well. Are you aware of the woodier fungus? Or do you know which one that is?
Yeah, it's auriculus, I believe the name of it is.
Yeah, it's commonly sold in like Chinese supermarkets. But I found that we've got that one on our property as well.
Wow.
Just on a big dead fig on all the fig's still alive, but it's got a lot of dead branches. It's still got that growing. So I know every time it rains, it just gives a good flush, and I go grab that and put it in like the chicken soups and stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Wow.
That's full of antioxidants. It hasn't got much flavour. It's like a jelly sort of thing, but heaps of health benefits to that one. And haven't yet tried the chicken of the woods, but we've got that on the property as well. So
fantastic.
It's flushed the last 4 years, but hoping this year I'll be able to get to try it. The slugs sort of get to it before me all the time.
Yep.
And I think horse mushroom we also get on the property, which is like a type of agaricus.
Okay.
Which I've eaten that one, and that's really cool because that just, when it flushes, the whole paddocks are just covered in white buttons everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a good feast when they're up. Do you want to walk us through the growing process? Like, how do you start? Do you start from a spore? How does all that work?
Yeah, so with commercial mushroom growing, we generally start with a liquid culture, which is going to be a specific single genetic strain. So with spores, they're the reproductive, I guess, gametes. They're half of the genetics. So 2 spores, there's a mummy spore and a daddy spore combined to make a new genetic variant. Generally, when we're growing for commercial production, we want to keep things pretty consistent. So we'll start by buying in a strain, and that'll be as a liquid culture normally, and that's just a little syringe with some floaties inside it, but that's all we need to start off with. So generally, that will go to an agar plate where it'll grow out on a petri dish, and we make sure that it's not contaminated. And then we use that to store long term, and then to create our own much larger liquid culture. So we make about a litre of mycelium floating around in a nutrient broth. And from that, we make a thing called grain spawn. So we take sterilised grains, and they get inoculated with a small amount of this liquid culture broth. And the mycelium loves it. So the grain spawn's really nutrient dense. It's got everything that they need to grow. And it also has quite a high surface area. So what you end up with is a fully colonised bag of grains that are completely covered in mycelium. And each of those is now able to be a little spaceship or vessel that we can use that to inoculate our what we call our bulk substrate, which we use sawdust and soy hulls. What's called master's mix in the industry. So it works really well for oyster mushrooms and lion's mane. You get really good, fast colonization, and you get really good initial flushes out of it 'cause it's quite high in nitrogen.
So would they be considered wood loving mushrooms?
Yeah. So there's generally there's two main types. There's compost loving and there's wood loving mushrooms. So pretty much all of the gourmet mushrooms grow on decaying wood. They're called saprotrophs. So they break down wood, and so your lion's mane, your oyster mushrooms, turkey tail, chicken of the woods, maitake, peony, pretty much everything that comes under the gourmet side of things generally grows on decaying wood. So they're all going to grow on sawdust basis reishi.
Yeah.
Your other sort of ones, so agaricus, your normal button mushroom, they grow on compost, as well as most of the psilocybe family.
Yeah.
So two very different setups for how you grow and what you need to do. When people are growing agaricus, so your button mushrooms, they'll have big trays of compost growing the mushrooms out of them. And actually, the biggest part of growing button mushrooms seems to be keeping up with how much compost you need to make.
Yeah.
Because obviously compost itself is tricky stuff to produce, and you need tons of it.
Not where I live.
Oh, well. to get that level of it,
Yeah.
it's an industrial process,
yeah,
just
for
making
sure.
the compost
Yeah.
for them to be able to
But enough for
grow
us
the
to
mushrooms.
enjoy is really cool. Spreading it in the because we got mushroom compost brought in,
Yep.
and now I just keep feeding it with our compost, and then they just keep flushing up now in the veggie
Oh,
garden.
absolutely.
So I don't really know when they come, but because we're out there watering all the time, you pull a leaf back and you're just like, yes, score mushroom for dinner,
Yep.
or breakfast. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, awesome. So, with the gourmets generally, they grow on wood. And so you're growing, or lignans. So a lot of the time, things like oyster mushrooms will grow on like straw and hay. Some mushrooms are a little bit pickier. So oyster mushrooms will eat pretty much anything that's got lignin in it. As you go up to some of your other mushrooms like reishi and lion's mane, they really prefer hardwood. And so we stick with hardwood because that works for everything that we grow. But yeah, there's a lot of different substrates that they'll grow off.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what we go through. So with ours, we'll inoculate our bags of sawdust. That needs to be done in a sterile environment because they've been heavily supplemented. They've got a lot of nitrogen, which means a lot of different microorganisms can grow in there.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure it's just going to be our mycelium.
Yeah.
So they get inoculated with the grain spawn in a sterile environment, sealed, and then they'll they go into an incubator for them to fully colonize, at which point they go into our fruiting chamber. We cut them open, they're exposed to the atmosphere, high humidity, and we get mushrooms start to flush out of them.
Yeah, nice. I remember you saying that you were having so many mushrooms you had to compost them. Is there much point to sort of saving them and trying to regrow them, or would they be contaminated sort of by that point?
Yeah, so the bags themselves have got a limited amount of nutrient in them. So generally we'll see, from our farm, we'll do 1 to 2 flushes with most of our bags, and that'll get probably 80% of what is going to be able to be produced out of it. You can get a third and a fourth and a fifth flush, but what happens is as time continues on, the chances that something else moves into the bag increase exponentially, as well as an exponential decrease in the size of what you get. So there's only so much space in our fruiting chamber for what we've got. And the main issue is a thing called fungus gnats, which is this little fly that eats mycelium and then lays its eggs. And it's really tricky. If you get them move into your fruiting chamber, you end up with a lot of new eggs into your new stuff, and it can cause an infestation. So we tend to dump our bags after about 2 flushes.
Yeah.
And then they go onto the garden, at which point, we'll always get these big, beautiful flushes of mushrooms once they start to grab extra nutrients from, mulch that's sitting around, any other sort of sources. They'll continue on.
Yeah, cool.
We are doing a little bit of research at the moment with spent lion's mane bags. So different mushrooms, almost like regenerative farming, the leftover spent substrate will be different composition depending on what mushroom's eaten through it. So it seems to be that the lion's mane spent mushroom compost has an increase in nitrogen levels, which should be really good for oyster mushrooms. So we've actually got a heap of leftover lion's mane substrate that we're going to see what we can grow oyster mushrooms on,
Yeah.
and see what kind of benefits we get from that. And there's a few research papers out there where they've tried this, and it's sort of almost like regenerative farming, where there's a cascade of you go from one to the next to the next to the next,
Yeah.
and each of them add and subtract different nutrients,
Yeah.
and you're able to get a lot more out of that one lot, even if you're adding in fresh sawdust each time, but keeping 50% of the other one.
Yeah. And you're probably going off like the farming side of it, if it works, you probably get larger flushes of like bigger mushrooms and stuff as well, because the nitrogen would be so high. Because like it's like rotational cropping as well in the garden. You wouldn't put a tomato where you had a tomato last year, because all the nutrients is sucked out from the previous year. So you'd put something else like chamomile or tansy or something like that, where it's gonna put all that nutrients back in. So it's like you go root vegetable, fruiting vegetable, leaf vegetable, and it just keeps going round and round. So then
Absolutely.
it's like a cycle that continues, and everything's regenerating, pumping things back in, taking things out. It's like that circle exchange. you know?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that was the idea to see, because obviously we end up with a lot of, for us, the mushroom compost is primarily, it's sawdust that's been broken down by mycelium. There's a lot of mycelium still active in there, but it's probably a cubic meter or so a week that we've got left over that we've got to do something with. So if we could reuse that again,
Yeah.
and get more out of it, we'd love to. And that's something we're sort of playing with at the moment. Obviously, the yields have got to be enough to make it worth it, because there's a lot of other costs. We've got to sterilize it. We've got
Yeah.
to put it into these bags that, we don't want to be using a lot if we're not going to get a lot of mushroom out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, if you need somewhere to put it ever, there's plenty of space on the property.
You're right.
Trying to increase fungal activity, which is cool, because like I'm a horticulturalist going into the soil side of things. What I've really recognised this year, or over the past few years, getting into regenerative agriculture, is a higher bacterial soil compared to a high fungal soil.
Yep.
Whereas a higher bacterial soil, you're going to get your weeds like your thistles, your plantains, dandelions, which is a hard compact soil with not much fertility. Whereas if you got higher fungal activity, that's where you get your ferns, your forests, like everything just greens and lushes up, and you get a jungle pretty much. And these weeds are considered, everyone likes to spray Roundup and get rid of them, where they're indicator plants are telling you what the soil's like. Whereas
Right.
if you, and they're trying to correct the soil, it's going to take 20 years of these weeds popping up. The soil will be regenerated to a certain extent, and then the seed bank will pop up new plants, and then the cycle will continue until it's like a jungle. You know what I
Wow.
mean? And that's kind of what I love about the fungal activity underground, is it's that network that's providing the nutrients, the microorganisms to everything. Like the carbon that the trees suck out of the atmosphere is storing it underground in the fungal, like the cell walls, and then the microbes are feeding off that. So Korean natural farming is that process of getting a indigenous microorganism. So you'd inoculate like a bag of barley or wood chips or something in the bush that's native to your area, and then once it's inoculated, you bring it into your vegetable garden. So you let that fungal activity spread through your veggie garden, and yeah, you're creating a natural environment which is suited to the one that's around you, so you can last against droughts easier, pests and disease when they come through the area. Like you're more suited to what's around your environment because of the native fungus that's there,
Wow.
and native organisms. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Have you ever heard of Korean natural farming?
No,
It's
never.
really interesting, because yeah, they're bringing the native fungus activity into the garden and working with that rather than spraying things. And it really annoys me, like living out in the Hunter Valley, everywhere where there's the grapevines, and they just spray and till and spray and till, and they're just destroying fungal activity, and they're wondering why they've got so many weeds. And it's like, where if they did something completely opposite. They might be like biodynamic farming. They might be getting a completely different result, and for the better, where they don't have to spend as much on the chemicals.
Wow.
And it's better for the health. It's better for the planet, and
It's
um,
it's amazing.
it's so cool. We're getting close to wrap up time, but I love how you sell the fruiting body of the lion's mane at the markets. For someone that doesn't really know what to do with it, have you got a recipe or something that you could share for that?
Yeah. So look, I was saying before, lion's mane's so versatile. If you're looking for something to just replace meat in a dish, so it can pretty much pretend to be almost any meat there is. Um, it's got a really fibrous, I guess, flesh. So cooking it with a bit of butter on its own, it does have a very mild taste, like lobster or crab. So we've got a great recipe for lion's mane crab cakes on our Instagram page,
Oh, cool.
where it's just shredded lion's mane flesh, and then you follow a crab cake recipe as you would standard. And the crab cakes that this produced, you wouldn't tell that it wasn't crab. The texture was spot on. The flavors, which most of it comes from the seasoning when you're talking about lobster and crab, were pretty well perfect. Uh, but probably one of my favorite simple ways to prepare it is just to use it in tacos. And so what I do is I'll slice it up into strips, and I give those strips a good pan fry for about 4 to 5 minutes, but completely dry, so no oil, nothing else, just the lion's mane. And what that does is it starts to get the temperature up and cooks through the inside of the lion's mane whilst getting the moisture out of it. So the mushroom cell walls are made of a thing called chitin, which it doesn't break down to like 350, 400 degrees entirely. So you can cook the hell out of it and it'll still hold its shape and its structure. So what'll normally happen is you get the moisture out of it over those 4 to 5 minutes, at which point then I put some olive oil in. They'll suck up the olive oil and they'll start to really sort of brown and crisp on the outside. And then I'll give them a good seasoning with just taco seasoning mix, a bit of cumin, some paprika, garlic, just your different, or even just your $2 packet from the supermarket. And that really coats them and gets it all nice and soaked up. Once they've sort of really, shrunk a bit more, I give them a big dollop of red wine, and that reinflates them again, and then reduce them down, and you end up with these slightly sort of fatty, oily, nice and deep red, and beautifully seasoned, essentially beef replacements for tacos. They look the part. They've got a chew similar to beef. They've got that little bit of an oily, fatty flavour like you would if you were chewing through beef, but you're 100% plant-based.
Yeah, that's so good. And that was on your Instagram as well, you said?
Not our taco recipe, but I'll throw it up.
Yeah, cool. So that's it. Hunter Gourmet mushrooms. And you brought a bag. What's in there?
So we've got some lion's mane for you. So it's just
Capsules or the...
No, the fruiting body. So
Dude, get it out. We've got the cameras here.
yeah.
Show the crowd, the listeners. If you're watching on YouTube...
So this is just a
Whoa.
sort of fresh. It's not loving the heat here,
Throw it up in the lens.
but you can see there, it's got its little icicles, and that's actually, our nice sort of setup. This guy here is just perfect, ready to eat. You'll see the flesh is really,
It kind of already looks like pulled pork.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's got that meaty.
And for those listening that we've been talking about microdosing and having lion's mane, if you're someone that's not comfortable with or can't get a handle on any magic mushrooms to do your microdosing, lion's mane is the next best thing. Like I've had 2 grams this morning, and I can even feel my visual seems to get a little bit clearer. Have you ever noticed that as well? Which is sort of similar to if I microdose, like my vision seems to get just that little bit more sharper, and I've found the lion's mane does that for me as well. I'm not sure if there's any science behind that side of it, but it'd be interesting to see over the next few years what it has on your optics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Ben, this has been awesome. I'll hope to catch you soon at the what is it, the Newcastle Farmers Markets?
Yeah, Newcastle Farmers Markets down at
For
Gourmet.
any of the listeners, yeah, Hunter Gourmet Mushrooms on Instagram, and you got a website link on there as well.
Yes,
Posting to all over Australia.
absolutely.
Yeah, get on that stuff because they're legit. I can feel the difference, and I use mine every day. We're actually running low, so I'll have to get some more of you soon. But yeah, is there anything else you want to drop with the listeners?
No, that's it, man.
No, you're cool. You're happy. Awesome. Well, thanks, man.
Pleasure.
Cheers. That was sick.
It's actually right on 1 hour.
Really? Yeah, exactly. 1 hour, 30 seconds.
Perfect.